that is open-minded and thoughtful, because the truth is that we all spend quite a lot of time. I know I spend quite a lot of my time talking about the protocol, sometimes on the airwaves, including I think 2 or 3 times today, once last night, and quite often on Twitter. And I sometimes have to check myself because I'm talking about it in quite binary and occasionally quite irate terms, because that's the nature of political debate generally, and particularly political debate here. And it's also the nature of the debate around Brexit and its consequences, which have become very strident and polarized. And that has obviously come on top of a political discourse in this part of the world, which is, as we all know, permanently strident and polarized, unfortunately. To answer your question directly, the Northern Ireland Protocol is it's a section in the withdrawal agreement between the United Kingdom, and it's probably worth saying that the full name of the UK state is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We obviously in the SDLP have a constitutional view, but we are still, and it's worth saying that because we've always been a party that believes in reconciliation and pursuing political constitutional objectives by persuasion and consent, that Northern Ireland is still in the UK, and that was said yesterday by the judge, by Justice Colton. But the Northern Ireland Protocol is basically it's a set of it's a part of the withdrawal agreement that governed the UK's exit from the European Union. Whenever the UK triggered Article 50, and it's probably worth saying in parenthesis, when the UK triggered Article 50, I was still the Brexit spokesperson at number 10 Downing Street, which means I have a slightly complicated perspective on all these things, but also an insight which is a bit more than just, as it were, straightforwardly a nationalist politician in Northern Ireland, or indeed a social democratic politician in Northern Ireland. But whenever the UK triggered Article 50 and began the process of leaving the European Union, the EU made clear at the beginning that it wanted agreement on 3 areas. One, the divorce bill, i.e. settling the UK's liabilities and assets as a departing member of the European Union. 2, how citizens' rights would be dealt with, and obviously we have part of the citizens' rights issue was dealt with in the last 24 hours because the deadline, sadly, for the EU settlement scheme has closed. So lots of EU nationals who were in the UK, including Northern Ireland, have had to register until last night. And then lastly, the Irish question, as it were, how you deal with the border on land between the 2 jurisdictions on the island of Ireland. There was a very convoluted, difficult bilateral negotiation between the UK and the EU, but that threw up very difficult questions about the nature of Northern Ireland and the meaning of the Good Friday Agreement, which is the agreement that that many of you will have predated many of your births, but has thankfully meant that you live in a largely peaceful society, which is at least in principle committed to reconciliation and pursuing objectives, constitutional or otherwise, via peaceful means. Part of the challenge was that document, kind of huge achievement though it was ambiguous. It created a set of relationships which sort of moved across 3 axes inside Northern Ireland, between North and South, and between the island of Britain and the island of Ireland, or if you like, between, indeed, actually, it wasn't just between the UK and Ireland or the island of Britain and the island of Ireland. It was between all, included the Channel Islands, included the Isle of Man as well. So it was the totality of relationships across these islands. Brexit, as you said, and as in your opening remarks, particularly hard Brexit, the UK leaving the single market and customs union, was always going to create challenges in terms of the complexity of those relationships, and so it has proven. So the protocol was ultimately, what the protocol is a device to limit some of the harsher consequences. It means there isn't a goods border on land on the island of Ireland. It also means, for example, that electricity can move across the all-Ireland energy grid. We have a single electricity market on the island. But beyond that, it doesn't limit all the other complexities and issues that have been caused. It doesn't mean that, for example, there's still free movement in Northern Ireland. It doesn't mean that and we don't face other disruptions on the north-south basis in terms of, for example, financial services. That's part of the reason why banks are less able to operate on an all-Ireland basis. But it does mean that Northern Ireland is not, the Northern Ireland faces checks on goods as they move from Britain into Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is in the single market in terms of goods regulation and de facto in the EU customs union, although technically de jure it's legally in the EU customs zone, the UK customs zone, which is part of the reason why UK customs officials are responsible for the collection of tariffs. Thankfully, tariffs are not being collected, but should in the future tariffs need to be collected, they would be collected by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and then sent back to London. But it would be the tariffs had to be paid. Now, I've given you a very complicated, what sounds like quite a complicated answer. It's as simple as I can make it, but it's a reflection of how complicated the position we've been put in was post-Brexit. And the protocol was, if you like, the umpteenth attempt at squaring a very difficult circle, and it happened very late in the day, and it was implemented with relatively short notice, or very short notice. Aidan and his members will have had to deal with the extreme brevity of the notice that was given. It has created a degree of disruption in terms of the movement of goods. Some of that has lessened as businesses have familiarized themselves. Mitigations were allowed through certain grace periods, some of which have ended, several of which have not ended, one of which has just obviously been extended. That's the prohibition on moving chilled meats. And it has also, it is true to say, caused disruption in our politics. And that was inevitable to some extent. It is extremely, from my perspective, problematic for us to completely essentialize different customs and regulatory processes in Northern Ireland as a constitutional issue, albeit it's important that I acknowledge that people are entitled to feel offended by it. I wouldn't demean or deny any unionist's right to note the fact that Northern Ireland faces certain different economic rules and is in a slightly different position. But I would also want to respectfully point out that in many, many ways, the two parts of Ireland are moving apart economically. The idea that we have what has been termed an economic united Ireland is not borne out by what's actually happened in terms of the movement of goods. We are aligned with the rest of Ireland and the EU, but in terms of services, and most of us nowadays work in services. Most of us, unless you're one of Aidan's members, most of us for a living don't move goods or manufacture goods. Actually, we work in services, and if you work in services, then it's the two bits of the island of Ireland are moving further apart, not closer. It's going to be harder to sell legal or financial services from Derry to Letterkenny. It's going to be harder to do all of those things. So there are a range of disruptions that aren't ideal. And as I said, the protocol is imperfect. I sometimes sound very strident when I'm talking about defending the protocol. In a sense, it's not because I love the protocol for its own sake. I can say genuinely, I wish it didn't exist. I wish we didn't have to have it, and I wish the UK had never left the European Union. And I don't just wish that for people in Northern Ireland or people on the island of Ireland. I wish it for the UK. Until last year, I lived for 20 years in Britain. My son was born in London. I'm very, very sad about what Brexit has done to the UK state, because though I have a constitutional aspiration about the island of Ireland, what happens in the UK and what happens in Britain matters enormously to me too. So I'm sad that Brexit happened, and I'm sad about all the disruptions. As I say, the protocol was in a sense the last thing. It was the last option standing. There were other options that were taken off the table. I think it has to be made to work, and by being made to work, that doesn't mean that it needs to be ossified or held in stone as it is. It needs to be implemented in good faith by both sides. That doesn't mean that both sides have been as responsible as each other in terms of how they've approached the last 6 months, because I don't think the UK government has been particularly responsible about it. But nor I'm not saying the EU has been completely perfect in how they've approached this, but in my view, it's mostly been the responsibility of this current UK government, which has caused a lot of the difficulties that we faced, including, I'm afraid, some of the frustration among unionists, who I think have been rightly insulted, not just by the fact of the protocol itself, and I get that people dislike it, but also by the sense of being misled and patronised by Boris Johnson's government. So making the protocol work means dealing with those. It means not treating it as something that's set in stone. It means treating it as a document which should be, I think, interpreted as flexibly as possible. We saw a lot of that yesterday from the EU in terms of moving on certain things, but it also means, and this is critical from my perspective, and I hope I get on to talk about more of this later, maximizing the opportunities. I think the protocol is a reflection of the fact that we are a dual society. We remain in the United Kingdom. That won't change until a majority of people vote otherwise, but we are, in a sense, both British and Irish. That was the core purpose of the Good Friday Agreement. That was the core spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. And if the protocol helps us gradually achieve that, then that shouldn't be a bad thing. If it helps us achieve some of, finally, an economic benefit from being a dual society, that shouldn't be a bad thing. Having access to import or export stuff both into the EU single market and also into the rest of the UK market, that doesn't give me any hang-ups as someone who has a constitutional aspiration in one direction. And I genuinely don't think it should give any unionist any issues either, albeit I respect that people are entitled to not like the idea of separate economic regulations from GB. I don't know how long I've gone on for now, so I'm bad at editing myself. Usually, Stephen, I know I can edit myself because it's Stephen Nolan shouting at me to stop talking and ask me another question. This is a much politer call, so I'll draw my remarks to a conclusion there and simply say the protocol is an imperfect device for managing the duality of our society. We need to make it work in the same way that we need to make this society work. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was absolutely brilliant. And unfortunately, I'm not Stephen Nolan, so I won't be shouting at you this evening. But that was
great. I might need it at some point.
Don't worry, I'll get Carl to do that. That's his job. But it's great to hear that perspective and hear the political perspective as well as from someone who lived in the UK. But on a terms of the practical level and how it actually affects businesses and on a day-to-day level, because I think that's what a lot of people in Northern Ireland care about. How is it affecting business? I think I'll bring in Aidan Connolly here, who's the director of the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, because a lot of people, especially my age, they don't necessarily, the national unionist constitutional question doesn't necessarily affect their day-to-day lives. But, when they hear Sammy Wilson telling them that they're not going to be able to get a sausage sandwich because of some political thing, that's when they start to care. So how is it really affecting businesses in Northern Ireland? Oh, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, I can't unmute myself. Can I just point out that I'm very happy to tell Matthew to shush at any stage. You just have to point me in his general direction and I will tell him to shush. So Matthew, shush. So thank you very much for having me here today. So I wear many hats, but the most important for today is that I actually live here in the north, and any of this stuff affects me, affects my 15-year-old son, affects my 70-something-year-old parents. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so busy with all this stuff, is because I genuinely care what happens here and I genuinely want to make this place work. And part of that is to keep choice and affordability for consumers here. Northern Ireland is very, very different than any other part of these islands. We have half the discretionary income of Great British households. That means that we have the highest levels of indebtedness, we have the least levels of financial security, and we have the least savings of anywhere in the UK. That means that if there are price rises, then it will be felt really hard. And it will be felt in areas that already have not seen their peace dividend and already are already suffering. So for me, this has been very clear, and it's one of the reasons why when everybody else was doing their Brexit campaign, we didn't actually take a side. What we said was, okay, tell us how it's going to be better. How is this going to be better for us? And our slogan for our campaign was a fair deal for consumers, and this day is what I'm trying to do. The other thing is that, so I'm the director of the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium. I am the convener of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, which represents about 85, just over 85, I think it's almost 90 now, with people coming on, % of business in Northern Ireland. And it's a business organization that's made up of business organizations, really, and tries to work together to do research, to do policy papers, to do meetings with people like Vice President Shevchevich. With, like, today I met with the Canadians, the Australians, the Swiss, the New Zealand. Yesterday I met with Benelux and Nordic embassies. So, you know, we're getting about, like. But as well as that, I am the Northern Ireland Commissioner on the UK Trade and Business Commission, which means I see how all of the other trade deals that are being struck, how those affect Northern Ireland. On the protocol itself, you may be surprised to hear this, but whenever the protocol came out, within 3 hours of it coming out, myself and 3 others had it dissected and read, and then put back together again. That later that evening, I put out a statement saying that the Prime Minister had not listened to the business community and had not listened to the people of Northern Ireland, and he hadn't. It's not what we wanted. We didn't want any barriers, north, south, east, or west, and this very clearly was going to put barriers. And where there are barriers, there is friction, and where there is friction, there is cost. And it goes back to that same thing that we can't afford to have cost. Even retail is high volume, low profit margin. That means that we can't afford to have those cost rises, and neither can the people of the north. Now, when it came in, we were supposed to have a year of a transition period to get ready for it. We did not have that. We had, it was a misnomer. We didn't have a transition period. We had a protracted negotiation period. And in fact, we only got trying out the new computer systems 2 weeks before the end of the transition period. We only got the regulations on moving parcels from GB to NI 13 hours before the new regulations came in. Now, business doesn't work like that. Business needs time. Any of those computer systems on their own, we would have probably phased in over a year. Not 4 computer systems and new regulations all in the space of a couple of weeks. But we managed it. And at the start of the year, we had these 2 really conflicting narratives. And what we had to do was, as we said, shooting unicorns. So it's breaking down the narratives and trying to tell the truth. So there was a lot of people who were saying that we were starving, and that was the narrative they wanted to go with, and it was absolutely not true whatsoever. And the one that got me was the woman standing in front of a shop saying it's really ridiculous, there's nothing, the shelves are empty, and she's standing there with 6 bags full of shopping, and it's just so it's no wonder it's empty. You've just cleared them all. But the other side is that you also had people, and especially the Secretary of State, say, "What's the border? It's absolutely fine. We're all dandy." Neither of the 2 of them was true. Right? The truth was that the average supermarket has between 40,000 and 50,000 product lines, and the most that was ever missing was a few hundred. You know, and that, you got to put that into perspective. There were some choice issues, but there were no food shortages. And on top of that, it wasn't just because of the protocol. For 9 days, things weren't going EU to GB because of the COVID lockdown. At that time of year, January, February, and March, it's not unheard of that we have some things missing. At that time of year, we get 90% of our tomatoes, 90% of our lettuce, 85% of our tomatoes, about 65% of all our fresh fruit and veg come from the south of the EU because it's outside of our growing period. So sometimes we just don't have that sort of stuff. So, that's where we were. One of the other trade bodies, a transport trade body, said on the 7th of January that we were 5 days away from the supply chain crash, and we're now 6 months later and that still hasn't crashed, right? So the big thing that I would ask you all is to try and look at the evidence rather than just what people are saying. However, there have been challenges, new customs codes, export health certificates for the PNR list, that list of chilled meats that came in on the 26th of February, and we dealt with it. But we dealt with it because we kept saying, right, we can absorb all this, but the big thing's coming down the road on the 1st of October, right? We have for 2 weeks talked about sausages, right? I don't want to talk about sausages anymore, right? Less than 10% of our sausages comes from GB, right? We make sausages here. In fact, there's 1.8 million people here and we feed 10 million people. And it's mostly things like beef, pork, lamb, lots of root veg and dairy products, all that sort of stuff. So the whole British sausage thing was a bit of a misnomer. However, you cannot discount it. Right. One of the things, and people, whenever I did the Institute for Government thing, people were very surprised at me saying that I'm annoyed at people on Twitter for completely discounting unionist and loyalist concerns. You cannot discount them. You know, if that is how people feel, you have to make sure that the information is out there. You also need to make sure that people are listened to. So the sausage thing is a bit of a misnomer. You know, it's not a sausage war and it's not a trade war. If this is what people think a trade war is, wait till you see what happens if we really go to trade war with someone. It's brutal. Everything's fair in love and war. It's even worse in a trade war. But so what we're doing now, what we have now is a bit of upset. However, the can's been kicked again. So I actually came out yesterday and I said that the sausage idea was a peripheral item. The peripheral, just completely on the periphery. It's a small beans, as we would say, down in Portadown. The real thing that's coming is the 1st of October. So your sausage sandwiches are safe until the 1st of October anyway. They were safe even if that hadn't happened. Because, you know, we there may have been some choice issues. There were not going to be starvation or shortage issues. The big thing that's coming down the track is on the 1st of October, where we need to have a trusted trader scheme in place or something, because we're going to need export health certificates, organic certificates, VIN certificates for wine. We're going to need phytosanitary certificates for products of plant origin and that sort of thing. And those can be done, but they're done at a cost. You need a vet to sign them off. You need loads of people to do the paperwork, and that's where we're getting to. So the protocol has opportunities, and for our manufacturers, for our agri-food guys, being able to sell into 2 markets is absolutely brilliant. But what we need to make sure is that we take business with us, that we take consumers with us, and we get to a point where everyone can enjoy the fruits of new investment and that FDI. But that foreign direct investment will only come if people think that we are economically and politically stable. And the biggest thing that's holding us back now is political instability at the moment. So for us to have jobs, you know, the biggest thing that come out of the protocol is we get some manufacturing jobs. Like Dale Farm got a huge contract with Arla recently. That could only happen because of the protocol, because they will be feeding into the EU market. That was huge news. There were 6 other negative protocol stories on the same day, and no one really heard about it. And it was a real sad thing, but that's how we do. We make it tangible to people. We tell people about what is actually could come and show it when it does come. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we can remove as much friction as possible. To do that, we need that trusted trader scheme. That's going to take time to do. Now, the most frustrating thing for business is that we can see the technical solutions. They're there. The political will isn't. But both sides need to move, EU and UK. On the one thing that would sort all this out overnight, right, and give us this space is a veterinary agreement. But the UK wants equivalence, which means that I sort of recognize your regulations, and I will wave at them. Whereas the dynamic alignment is you're actually taking them all in, you're hugging them, and those are and as they move, you move, and that sort of thing. So, but the big thing is, this is what kills me about this, because the UK government, their 2 big things are Brexit and get those new trade deals. That's Australia, US, and on the other one, it's shoring up the union, proving that the union works, all that sort of thing. Getting the veterinary deal, they could do it both. So the veterinary deal with a guillotine clause, that means something that is triggered. So whenever we get the Australian deal, because we only have an agreement in principle now, or wherever we get the US deal, and the moment that SPS changes are coming in because their goods are coming in, because remember, it takes about 4 years, 8 months to get a proper trade deal all done and dusted and implemented. So you still have 4 years then to where we'd still be aligned with the EU. 80% of checks, 80% of paperwork flowing, but it doesn't only help us. Scottish fishermen, Welsh lamb farmers, consumers across the UK would continue to get their goods from the Republic of Ireland, from the EU in the same way. So what we really have here is a triumph of ideology over economics. I can't stay a landing zone at the minute. However, I work in business in Northern Ireland, and therefore I am an eternal optimist. I think it will come to a crunch, but our big ask to both the EU and the UK is live up to your commitments in the preamble to the protocol. And in the preamble of the protocol, they said that the protocol would be implemented with the least disruption to Northern Ireland communities. That's not happening, and that's what I will continue to ask them for. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aidan. That was incredibly enlightening, and it's great to hear how it is affecting businesses, and especially those things that I never knew that you can only get 90% of. Was it tomatoes during January? I thought the supply issues might be because everyone bought them out over Christmas, but that's just me. But thank you so much, and it's great to hear how it is affecting business, because there are some pros, and do you know what, there are some cons as well, but it's looking to see how we can progress past that for the best of both communities. Because nationalist or unionist, we all need to buy our sausages at the end of the day. And so next, I heard you talk a lot about political instability and, you know, political will, and I'm 18, so for 3 years of my life I had no government in Stormont, and it was just like that's nearly, doing the maths of it, like a sixth of my life. Like, that's crazy, and it's unfair. And for young people to continue to see that there's not, you know, there's still that clash between cultures on the Hill, it's just not great. But Will, you're a young person, and what do you think about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Like, does it actually matter to you? Do you feel it really having an effect on your life? And what do you think we can do to move past it?
Thank you very much for letting me speak. Yeah, so, you know, as a young person in Northern Ireland today, you know, particularly involved in politics, I have found a real interest in the protocol recently. We in the SDLP obviously opposed Brexit in any form, never mind the hard style of Brexit that the government in Westminster is pushing on us now. And the protocol is a product of Brexit. So therefore my stance on it is that, you know, I'm not thrilled about it. But, you know, like Brexit, it happened, and it's internationally agreed, and the court has now, you know, confirmed it. You know, it's here to stay, and I firmly believe that we should try and make it work for all our communities here in Northern Ireland, because there are the disadvantages, but there are many benefits to it as well. You know, we do have that very valuable asset of being able to have access to, you know, both the EU single market and the UK internal market. There are issues with the East-West trade, but, you know, we're not going to solve that with the constant negative rhetoric. And, you know, we need to get past that constant negative rhetoric we're hearing, particularly from voices in the DUP, but other voices too, regarding the protocol. I think it's time to examine what are the benefits of the protocol, particularly for our business community. And, you know, use this political advantage, is what I say it as, to deliver for people right across the north and right across the island of Ireland. I think it's time to be practical and pragmatic, and I believe that's how most people in the north really are when it comes down to doing the right thing for people. I think we need to properly explore the benefits of the protocol, but this can't be done when all parties involved aren't willing to sit around the table, iron out the issues, and deliver for the people they represent. I think one great I think that one great way we can really promote and encourage benefits of the protocol is with, as I heard Matthew talking about before, an investment conference and stuff like that. You know, business in Northern Ireland, as I said before, has an incredibly exciting and valuable opportunity to see a almost worldwide unique circumstance. And I believe without the rhetoric of the DUP and others being so loud, we may actually have been seeing more of that investment opportunity right now, as with Deal Farm, and we would have been seeing it earlier. You know, it's the job of our executive to work with investment bodies like Investment and I to go out into the world and sell Northern Ireland as a positive area to invest in. And with the protocol, we have now, in a way, with its flaws that can be fixed, a fantastic pitch to sell them with. And I don't feel like the executive is doing this at all. And I believe that the fault of that lies with the DUP. I think particularly the DUP calls the threats of the union as because of the protocol. But we saw the other day with the High Court ruling, that's just not the case. To keep the Act of Union you know, using that as an excuse is a bit late, because it's been broken countless times since 1801. You know, the work to reconstruct an article so broken would take decades, not just scrapping one protocol. You know, how like we'd have to even see the Republic of Ireland fall back under British rule for a start if we wanted to see the Act of Union being repaired. And I get a small suspicion that that's not going to happen anytime soon. You know, I just feel that, you know, if the unionists aren't calling for Ireland to be put completely under the United Kingdom again tomorrow, but they're calling for this protocol to be scrapped tomorrow. Like they're picking and choosing what aspects of the Act of Union that they want to protect. You know, the DUP are taking the DUP are also talking about, you know, alternative processes to the protocol, you know, which, you know, that, for example, a lot of what the rhetoric that they're saying now is very familiar to what they swiftly, you know, turned down in 2017, back when they held the literal balance of power in Westminster. You know, the DUP supported Brexit, I think, in the hopes of a hard border being established on the island of Ireland, and I think they didn't get their way, and they're now calling a constitutional crisis. This constitutional crisis, in their opinion, is, I believe, their own fault. Uh, you know, despite Northern Ireland voting against Brexit, they pushed it and supported it, knowing full well that the situation that we are in now was definitely a possibility. They took that risk when supporting and pushing Brexit. And I personally think that the DUP calling now to be treated like the rest of the United Kingdom, despite for many years withholding abortion rights for women, equal rights for people to get married in Northern Ireland for years, it's just complete hypocrisy, and just shows that when it comes down to it, the DUP care more about, I think, advancing their personal objectives rather than advancing the lives of people they represent. You know, whether that be through allowing the advantages of the protocol to go through and sitting down and working through it and ironing out the issues together, all parties together, or whether that be through allowing people their equal and human rights. You know, the protocol is by no stretch of the imagination, though, perfect. There are definitely issues which we need to be raising and coming up with pragmatic and practical solutions to. You know, the massive issue with it is like licensing of medication. I strongly believe that we should be seeing some sort of mutual recognition agreement with the EU licensing and the UK licensing for medication. I think that would make things a lot smoother. You know, like we are seeing massive issues with East-West trade. I think we really need to have all people in power, representatives, sitting down and sorting that out, because it really can't continue, because it is hurting our business community, and we can't deny that fact. Like, you know, but at the same time, we can't just completely scrap the protocol. So we need to work together, I think, to overcome those issues. You know, we can't constantly listen to the negativity and tantrums. You know, I think we have to be like adults now, you know, and engage with each other to make, you know, time to cast aside party affiliations, I think, and make the protocol work, because it can be so great for our communities here in the North. And, you know, we could be a worldwide symbol of success and cooperation. And instead, I feel we're kind of seen like a baby throwing its toys out of the pram. You know, I do still believe and hope as a young person that our future does lie in Europe. You know, Europe has offered so much to young people in Northern Ireland throughout the years. And a massive example of this would be the Erasmus program to study abroad in Europe, which is a massive, possibly defining part of young people's third level education studies. And it's facilitated to us by Europe, you know, within Europe. I do hope that progress is made to stay close to Europe in many ways. As I feel, as a young person of Irish nationality, I'm also proudly European. So I think it's time for our public representatives from all communities, all different sides of the house, to make the decision. Do we work with the protocol, make it work for our people, our business community, invest in down, ironing out the issues and fixing what we have to work with? Or, you know, do we continue to tantrum, you know, threatening to bring down facilities of representation here in Northern Ireland, and see the results of a hard Brexit further damage business and people on this island? You know, the choice really can't be ours yet, not until the next election. But, you know, so we are reliant on our representatives to do what is right in this situation. And I believe what is right in this situation is to utilize the protocol to try and make it work for people. Because at the end of the day, as a representative, I feel like your job would be to make sure that people's lives are the best they can be. And I think with the evidence, there are issues with the protocol, but I think the protocol is the best way to do that. And I'd really love to see, although I don't think I'll see it anytime soon, a different rhetoric coming from all parties working together, particularly from the DUP, about looking at the positives, and just seeing how they can make this work. So yeah, that's all I've really got to say on it, but hopefully it was what you were looking for.
Thanks very much, Phil. That was brilliant. And it's great to hear a young person's perspective. And that's what we're all about. And thank you so much for coming tonight and representing SDLP Youth. It's great to have our members on board because that's what we want to do. I might be a bit biased, but I think we have a lot of talent in our youth wing, and it's great to be able to show it off at levels like this. But we heard there you were talking about, the threats that have been made at political institutions, bringing them down. And I know there was certainly a lot of that, especially during the DUP leadership campaign. But I think at the core of it, we're all here to discuss, and we're all here to talk about what we can do next. And that's what the SDLP does best. We talk, we discuss, and we get to the bottom of these problems to see how we can actually progress forward. But at its core, we need to hear from all sides of the community, because although we are a nationalist party, we also need to understand the concerns of the unionist and loyalist communities. And I think I'll bring you in here, Brian, and I'll just ask you to unmute. What are the concerns of the unionist and loyalist communities, and what can we do to ease those concerns in a manner that consults both sides, and we don't jump to the conclusion like some parties have, such as the DUP, of thinking of bringing down Stormont? What can we really do, and what can nationalists do to ease those concerns?
Thank you very much, Inez and Carol, for the invitation, and I certainly agree with you. You have a lot of really good, impressive, progressive young leaders within the SDLP as well, especially, and it's actually, I'm actually glad I'm last on this, because Matthew and Aidan were very good at providing the background to the technicalities of the protocol, and have a lot more knowledge than I have around that. I suppose I think the angle I want to take is what you intimated there, is around kind of how it's impacted on civic society, and how it's impacted within civic unionism, particularly. I mean, it's always been good to see Matthew and Aidan on the airwaves describing, I suppose, the pragmatism and practicalities of the protocol, because it's something that we feel unionism per se doesn't really get the opportunity to provide a broader perspective. It's usually the Stephen Nolan principles of getting Sammy Wilson on, or Jamie Bryson, and that somehow represents the nuances of civic society within unionism. I mean, whenever you were asked me to do this, I remembered, or I thought back to when the referendum was happening in 2016, and I'm actually a Remainer and pro-union, and I was actually in France for the Euros watching the Green and White Army, and didn't get to vote because somehow Northern Ireland qualified for the last 16, so had to stay on for the Wales game. But to me, that context is really important, because to me that's where I think the start of the current issues really began, in 2016. And what happened very quickly, unfortunately, I mean, I'm I suppose someone from the unionist community who's lived in Londonderry here all my life, apart from a couple of years in Manchester, and I'm a proud Derry person, I'm a proud Londonderry person, and that took a while to get to that state, because as a minority, or a member of a minority community in a peripheral part of Northern Ireland, Britain, and Europe, it's always been very difficult for unionism to get an effective voice. And I suppose so what happened there, I mean, in 2016 we were in a pretty good position in terms of civic stability, but what happened, I felt, unfortunately, since then has been a kind of a level of political opportunism, and obviously how the protocol itself has panned out, or how Brexit's panned out, has kind of become, it's kind of got to a point where unionism at all shades has felt under threat. I mean, my key passion within the community sector here in Derry is to try to encourage alternative forms of leadership. I'm doing a PhD in Cork at the moment, looking at alternative apolitical forms of leadership, and how we can encourage civic unionism to come to the fore. And what I found in my time doing that has been that there's a lot of levels or different forms of unionism, and unfortunately, almost from day one, the Protestant unionist loyalist community were labelled as the right-wing Little Englanders, that it's this kind of binary politics that we like to kind of box ourselves into here in Northern Ireland, and very quickly we were seen as the bad guys in all this, and that there was no in between. You were either on the good side or you were on the bad side, and very quickly as well, unfortunately, I felt that the Southern government and the European Union themselves positioned themselves within the kind of anti-unionist perspective. We also had, I suppose, since then, political opportunism coming from the political parties, which we, I suppose, have come to expect. But whenever you get a situation where a commentariat and even academia take that binary perspective very quickly as well, then you get into a situation very quickly where unionism feels as if it has to defend itself, and we all find ourselves then going back to the old language and narrative of us against them. And I've seen that progress at kind of low levels from 2016. All of a sudden, the Protestant population, they were quite happily tootering along, where all of a sudden, feeling as if they were again under threat, under siege, and having to kind of reestablish or reiterate their sense of national identity. More flags started to go up, more curbstones started to be painted, and all of a sudden the national identity question was back to the fore. And even someone like myself, who's probably kind of centre right in my politics, and I suppose my politics, but very much kind of centre left and my socialist ideals, all of a sudden we were kind of being forced into a certain perspective. If someone who's relatively progressive like myself is doing that, then you can understand how our own political unionism starts to make hay from that, and that kind of has been building up, I suppose, for 4 or 5 years, and it kind of came to a head, I suppose, at Easter this year, and it's important. I mean, I suppose it's not specifically about what I'm saying, it's not specifically about the protocol, but it's an important context because it's shown how that type of narrative and that type of process can lead to really serious issues on the ground. And whenever the civic unrest happened, and it started here in estates in Derry, in an old community where I worked in Tullyalley, and then kind of spread like a domino effect right across the province. And that in itself is quite unique, because quite often what happens within unionism in Derry is that you often take their lead from what happens in Belfast, in a North Antrim. But this time, the issues initiated, or the tinderbox started off in estates here in the city. And whenever we went to look into that, we spoke to the young people who were engaged in civic unrest, and to the people who were in the fringes of that, and the manipulators. We found a kind of whole range of issues. It coincided as well with a major piece of research at the Londonderry Bands Forum, where I work, carried out looking at Protestant attitudes within the Derry Strabane District Council area. And a lot of the findings that came out of that, which happened to be launched at the end of March, around a week before the civic unrest happened, kind of aligned to what we were hearing then on the ground in terms of the rationale behind the civic unrest, what happened. And there was 5 issues there that came to the fore whenever we went through it. And the first was that issue I talked about before, this anti-British narrative and a sense of frustration that unionism was being left behind and ignored and pigeonholed. What normally happens within unionism is they're actually quite quiet in terms of what they do. They kind of stare at their feet rather than address issues. And that goes back to a kind of sense of the old Protestant beg and bowl mentality, where we allow our political leadership to stand up for us and be our voice. And so it actually takes quite a lot for unionism to react in the way it has. They're not usually proactive in terms of protest. It's usually they're usually more reactionary. This time they were proactive in initiating violence. The second issue, I suppose, which can't be ignored, is policing. If we actually go back to where it all kicked off in Tullyalley, it actually kicked off not because of the protocol, or because of even anti-British narrative, or because of anything. It kicked off because of interface violence between the 2 estates. the police came in to address that, and the young people in Tullyally, in the unionist part, for example, thought that the policing in the area was more heavy-handed than it was in Currynearn. That the perfect storm almost aligned, because around that same time the PPS decision around the Bobby Story funeral hit the headlines as well, which kind of added fuel to this idea that there's two-tiered policing in the within loyalist areas and Derry and across Northern Ireland. So that was the second kind of key toxic ingredient. The third was the protocol itself, that was in the headlines and was starting to come to the fore. But I mean, it's no secret, if you were to ask the 13-year-old who was born in a wheelie bin in Tullyally or Irish Street or Nelson Drive about the protocol, that was something in the ether for them, that heard about it, but there was no real understanding of it. Their sense was that it was something that was threatening their identity. So it was actually quite minor in terms, I suppose, of the overall set of ingredients, but it was there in the background nonetheless. The fourth one was the lockdown. I mean, there was young people who, like every young person across Northern Ireland and the UK and the world, were coming out of 18 months of lockdown, where those support structures weren't within communities, and young people weren't able to get the kind of influence from youth provision in the areas. They weren't able to meet their young people sporting events or whatever. So that kind of guidance, that sense of guidance and leadership had dissipated over those 18 months. Whenever we spoke to a young person, for example, in Tullyally, as to why they were involved, one of the leaders said, well, had our community hall been open, these young people would have been in band practice 2 days a week, and they wouldn't have been on the streets. So we can't underestimate the impact of that lack of connectivity and those lack of structures, and how that impacted and what happened 2 or 3 months ago. But to me, the kind of the fifth ingredient was probably the most impactful, and that was, I suppose, where the fractures within political unionism had started to really come to the fore there. I mean, I agree with a lot of what was said there, and I think it's by time we dispelled the myth that people think that unionists aren't aware that the DUP and political unionism is a nonsense. That has added greatly to the frustration. There's a great sense of betrayal within unionism around how the Prime Minister has handled the protocol, and the lies that the Westminster government have told around this whole process, and how the DUP are again trying to hoodwink unionists into believing that they weren't part of that problem. People within unionism know that. The people within at grassroots level know that. They're fully aware of it. And what we had seen developing very recently as well, and it came out in our research in March as well, about this disconnect between grassroots unionism and political unionism. That chasm had become even greater. I mean, we were on the ground in certain areas where when the DUP turned up to try and mediate, were told no uncertain terms where to go. So that relationship was there. And if I was to I suppose to rank those 5 ingredients which created the civic unrest, I would put the fractious relationship between civic unionism and political unionism at the forefront of that. That civic unrest wasn't about a reaction to nationalism, or a reaction to republicanism, or a reaction to threats from the EU or from America or from the Southern government. That was a statement towards political unionism, and I think that that context, I suppose, is really important. And that has led, that has carried on, that has dragged on, that is now emerging into the summer, and how that might play out over the summer months. Of course, it hasn't been helped by what's happened since. And I mean, for someone who, I know after 2016 there was consistent calls for a second referendum. By the time 2018 had come across, I would have voted to leave. So I'd gone from a Remainer to a Leaver, and that would have been consistent with a lot of people who within unionism who would have voted to remain. So you got to remember that at around 40–50% of pro-union people would have remain or voted to remain to stay in the UK in the EU anyway. But we felt that how the other stakeholders conducted themselves has had a real negative impact. I mean, I think what's come across very clearly since then is, that what people are saying is that the threat of Republican violence seemed to hold a lot more sway than the threat of loyalist violence. And I think Will might have said that the DUP are trying to initiate a hard border on the island of Ireland. To be fair to them, and I don't often say this, the one consistent throughout the whole process in 2016 was that no one wanted a border on the island of Ireland, and even the DUP were consistent. And that, so we had the nonsense of this positioning of the EU with the good guys. It was very Orwellian. The 2 legs good, 4 legs bad, and we were the 4 legs bad, and the EU were very quick to position themselves and the good things. So you had this series of nonsense photographs along the border of Nancy Pelosi and others at any opportunity talking about this threat, and that this threat of Republican violence was the reason why we had to go down this various route. And then all of a sudden, once the protocol had been agreed, then all of a sudden the threat of loyalist violence isn't given the same level of attention or credibility. So I suppose from a unionist perspective, I think what we need is a degree of honesty from right across the board. There is a threat to the Good Friday Agreement because of the protocol. It was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that that Brexit was going to create civic instability, but a lot of it was, I think, pushed through a very public narrative. And one final point I think has been really important in all this whole process since 2016 has been how it has been portrayed in the media, because people do listen to the media. People, if you're not getting effective political leadership from whatever source, then you're going to take what you're going to form your opinion on what you hear from the commentariat, from the newspapers, from social media, from the political leadership, and from other sources. And I think that they've shown a great deal of ingratuity around that, and need to be aware that we need to be honest in these discussions. And then I totally agree. I think it was Aidan himself had said, that despite all the positivities around Brexit, we're only hearing the negativity around it. And I agree completely with Will as well. I think that the DUP need to wise up. They need to get away from this negativity. I mean, it's incredible to think how the DUP, and we're seeing it at the moment with the Irish language debate as well, but it's incredible how the DUP always seem to turn a win into a loss. And I was a member of Foyleport when Brexit happened, and my first reaction with the agreement was that there's economic opportunities here through free ports, through having access to both the internal market and the EU single market. And there was even at one point, I think Arlene Foster herself hinted at that, but very quickly turned it into the constitutional issue and into the identity issue, and again backed themselves into a corner. I don't know how they're going to get out of it. I assume there'll be some kind of fudge to the language and fudge to the protocol. But at the moment, it's precarious, and also still under the prism of mayhem within political unionism. With the fractious relationships that are happening, particularly within the DUP, then it's in a very difficult position. It's left unionism at a state now where there's been no leadership. I talked, at the start about, as a unionist growing up in Derry, I always felt, as part of the minority community, that we were always very peripheral, peripheral within the city, in the sense that 15,000 Protestants moved from the city side out to the suburbs of Tullyalley, New Buildings, Nelson Drive. No coincidence, the same areas where the violence started. We always felt, it's a Derry thing anyway, we always feel peripheral to Belfast, we feel peripheral to Dublin, we felt peripheral to Westminster, we felt peripheral to Brussels. And if you're within a unionist community, then if there's no effective leadership at political level as well, you really do feel marginalised and isolated, and that leaves a hugely dangerous political vacuum. And we need to be careful, I suppose, as a community right across Northern Ireland, of all shades, that we don't allow this to progress, because I don't want to be too negative or too want to be too downbeat. But I mean, I've been involved in the community sector here as a worker for 25 years, and I've never. People have always said to me that I've always asked me, will ever return to violence, and I've always 110% never said never. We've gone too far. We're too embedded in the Good Friday Agreement. We were too embedded in social capital within the province here. We'll never return to the level of violence we had. I'm checking that response now. I've never seen it at a point where we're as vulnerable now as we're as vulnerable now as we have been since 1992, 1995, whenever the Parade issue was a huge issue around Drumcree and that, and we were on the verge of civil war, and so we need to be very, very wary of that.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was great to hear. And I think it's important that we do hear the views of everyday unionists as opposed to just the political unionist rhetoric that we often hear. Because like you said, unionists themselves are often frustrated at the DUP as well, portraying this narrative. But thank you so much for your perspective, and we really appreciate that. And I'm sure your community and the wider society appreciates the community work that you are doing. But I think next, we're going to move on to Sinead, if she's okay with that. Because we've heard a lot about, the cultural impact, the constitutional impact, and how people feel about the protocol. But as the economy spokesperson, I think you can give us a kind of wider view of how it's actually affecting the economy, because it is really just a perfect storm. We've had COVID, we've had Brexit, and now we have the protocol. So how is it really affecting the Northern Irish economy, and what can it benefit us? Is it going to affect us? What are your thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, I have to unmute you. Is that it there?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you everybody else, and thanks for inviting me along here this evening for your contributions. It's been really insightful, and I suppose the first thing that I can say is Matthew and I are both political in the political sphere now as a result of Brexit. We both had other lives and thought we would be working in a completely different way. And then Brexit came along and it did change everything. We thought we were in a settled place, and a lot of people were very, very happy and content with that Northern Irishness and working towards making Northern Ireland work. My background was as Chief Executive of the Londonderry Chamber of Commerce. I had worked there from 2005, Chief Executive from 2010, and really the whole emphasis of my work was to make sure that the business environment was conducive to the needs of the business community, and the business community where they weren't orange or green, it was just the business community. So it was a completely different work environment, but Brexit, as I say, changed everything, and very, very quickly. In early 2016, I got very concerned of what the impact of Brexit might be on our community and on the stability that we had tried to so hard to have in Northern Ireland, and as a result of that, I suppose a bit not like Aidan, where his business organisation were trying to remain, I wouldn't say remain neutral, they weren't, but just not getting involved, I suppose, in that level of debate. But at the Chamber of Commerce in Derry, we got very involved in the debate because we were obviously a border Chamber of Commerce. We worked very closely in both jurisdictions, and I was completely immersed in the fact that this could provide real instability in a place where the potential was that there could be a border in 3 parts of this city. And 3 exits are surrounding. So I was very involved, and as a result of that became the vice chair of the Remain In campaign for Northern Ireland. So I didn't stand to the side and spoke out and was obviously horrified at the result. But as a result of that, the product of that, we've now both moved into the political sphere, and my political home was the SDLP for the reasons that were clearly articulated earlier on by yourself and with Carol. I see this as a party where we look to find solutions. It's a party where relationships do matter, and relationships north, south, east, west are important, and obviously the impact that it has had in the Good Friday Agreement, and I totally agree with Brian. Yes, it has had an impact in the Good Friday Agreement where people are unsettled in themselves in just their constitutional identity, but it was a good judgment that we heard yesterday that, you know, it hasn't had the protocol hasn't had any impact in the Constitution, but that doesn't negate how people feel about it, and I want to say that with the utmost respect. Just, you know, what does the protocol mean to the economy here? We've had just the most tumultuous year. You know, I was doing some appraisals with my staff earlier on today, and we're just reviewing the last 12 months. And between COVID and the protocol, we're just living in, you know, such strange times, and it has had an impact. But unfortunately, I actually, whilst we didn't want Brexit in any shape, form or fashion, I'm not a great lover of the protocol, but it is the necessary outworkings of a hard Brexit. And to be in Northern Ireland, to be in a position where you have competitive advantage over all regions, other regions in the United Kingdom, to me, is something that we've never, ever had. And we've always been working against you know, the rest of the regions in the UK. They had more advantages than we've had. We are, as Brian said, always the periphery, but now we really have a standout. Our unique selling point is the fact that we have access to 2 markets, 2 major markets, obviously the UK internal market and the EU single market and customs union, and we've never had that position before. But the position itself means absolutely nothing if we can't provide political stability in and around that, if we can't inspire confidence in investors that political or that advantage point is going to remain. We need a predictability around our economy in order to make advances in the opportunity, and we haven't got that. There is a lot of negativity around the protocol, a lot of rhetoric around the protocol, a lot of non-facts, but you know, they're talked about as if, you know, as Aidan said about, you know, there's nothing in the shelves, you know, or we can't get anything in here at all. Everything that, you know, those are not actual economic realities, but they are in people's head as if it's real. And so we have to work really hard at being able to maximize the opportunities. And it's, you know, investors, there are windows and they're very short windows. And people need to believe that we have got this economic advantage. Our economy today, as we stand here in Northern Ireland, we're in a difficult place. COVID has, you know, our productivity levels are low, our employment levels are lower than other regions of the United Kingdom. We have high levels of deprivation, we have child poverty, we have fuel poverty, we have all of the issues, and we have low levels of skills here. and we've really big challenges in front of us. And we've had, you know, let's face it, pretty dysfunctional government here in Northern Ireland for quite some time. Whilst we had the institutions up and running, they've done it in a bumpy fashion, and we've had 3 years where we've had no institutions at all, 3 critical years in which we should have been finding some peace and reconciliation around the Brexit and the problems that were manifesting and very obvious, particularly to the business community. And when you know, the institutions were down, we had, and I have to praise the business community, they were our voice. They were our voice with the UK government, with the EU government, and they stepped in when political representatives stepped out and didn't perform their role and duties. Now, I mean, I'm part of these these political parties now, but I have to say the SDLP are a very small part. We have 11 ministers in Northern Ireland and throughout the executive, and we have one, and we do what we can. But it, you know, it has to be the priority of government to settle things here and to get working on the things that really matter to people. I think that, you know, we had a briefing on Monday from the Deputy President of the European Commission, in which he extended an invitation that we would have, that he would support, the EU would support a joint investment conference where we would sell the opportunities of investing in Northern Ireland, and that they would bring trade delegations to Northern Ireland and espouse all that is good about this place that we all call home. And I think that that is absolutely so important, that we take that opportunity. And I think if we work collectively and work together and have that joint vision of making this place work, that it would, to me, it might settle down the fear that has been built up around the identity and the constitutional question. And really, you know, the protocol, as we have seen from the judgment there the other day, it has not affected the constitutional question. That only can change is when the people vote for it to change. And I don't think that that's happening anyway soon, because there needs to be an awful lot of work to be done before we put any monumental questions to the people of Northern Ireland or the people of Ireland. And we've seen what happens when you put a question where you don't know what the answer is going to be, and you don't know what happens when people do answer it. So we should learn the lesson of that, and we should really work collectively to make Northern Ireland work. I have real concerns, obviously, to make sure that the protocol provides or eliminates as many barriers as we possibly can. Obviously north, south, east, west. I think that the European Commission has acted in good faith yesterday when it has extended the grace period for chilled meats. Also about, has looked at the issue around guide dogs, has looked at an issue that's very close to my heart and probably Brian's heart as well. This green card that you need for driving across the border, like things like that. They are really, and I can understand that it grits people, like, this is our space, this is where we work, this is where we go and have a walk, and that, and all of a sudden we have to have some kind of different insurance to just move about in the place that we call home. So, we need those good faith movements from the EU and from the UK as well. But always remember, the protocol is here because of the type of Brexit that was chosen. And until an alternative to that protocol, which nobody has produced, people can say they don't like it, they don't want it, but no solution is available. at this present moment in time, we do need, as Aidan says, we've got the 1st of October coming along. We do need some form of trusted trader scheme. We need to be able to eliminate as many of those checks as possible. There is an easy way of doing it with aligning to the SPS or PCS. It's not easy to say, is it? So, and those veterinary those veterinary agreements, there is an easy way of doing that would take away 80% of those checks, and that seems sensible, even if it's done on an interim basis until other trade agreements are finalized. It would take away and give us time and give businesses time to prepare, and that. But we have an absolute economic advantage, and we need to make a quick move on it in order to maximise the opportunities, particularly for our agri-food sector at this moment in time. I think there was a lot of nonsense talked about, the sausages and all of that there, crack. There really is. I just know so many businesses in and around here, in and around Derry, that have been able to find new business as a result of the protocol. And they're not talking it up, they're not shouting from the rooftops, and they should be, but it's because of the toxic environment in and around, speaking about the protocol and how we've managed to change a competitive advantage into a negativity is just astounds me in so many ways. And I think that, at this particular point in time, we should be concentrating on our efforts in growing our economy, upskilling our people, giving investment into, our higher education, making sure that our young people want to live and stay in this place. We should have, no brain drain from our young people because they find this environment toxic and negative for them, and we should move collectively to a place where we can work together. And I think it is doable, but unionism, when I talk about unionism, I think Protestants, I'm reading at the moment Susan McKay's book, Northern Protestants on Shifting Ground, but I'm not even sure if that's entirely true. I think society in general, Protestants, Catholics, etc., we're all in shifting ground. I think the people are more progressive than the politicians, and that if we get bogged down in the minutiae of little things and don't see the big picture, we are going to be left behind because the people are going to leave us behind. I'm kind of coming in there as a sweeper in relation to what others have said, but and I don't want to go over anything that anybody else has said, but I do think we have a critical time here to make a move in order to maximise the opportunities of the protocol and the unique position that we find ourselves in. And if the EU want to continue to help us find those investors and bring trade delegations to Northern Ireland, my door's open and I'll talk to anybody about it.
Thank you very much, Sinead. We really appreciate your perspective, and thanks so much for coming this evening. Thank you to all of our fantastic speakers for giving such a range of perspectives and thoughts. It's so great to hear them all together, because often, like Matthew said, you can hear Sammy Wilson shouting on Nolan about sausages for half an hour, but you don't actually hear the real opinions of real people. But I think now we're going to get into the question section, which is quite exciting. We already have quite a few in. And first in we have from Ellie Jo Taylor, and this is for Matthew O'Toole. Ellie Jo, I think, was on Nolan at the same time as you, Matthew, and she would like to ask you what the Northern Ireland Protocol means for rams. But I think seriously she would like to hear more about the veterinary agreement and what actually is the impact of that and what can we really do about it. I know Aidan talked a bit about it, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I'd quite like sometimes to mute the host when I go on the Nolan programme, but sadly I don't have that ability. So the veterinary agreement is completely critical. I was actually leafing through earlier on a document which came out just after, it was one of the last things I worked on before I finished in the civil service in number 10, which was a paper. It was the first position paper, substantive position paper that the UK government did on how it was going to deal with border issues, Ireland issues. And it came out in August 2017. That was about 6 months after 5 or 6 months after Article 50 was triggered, and it talked about the need for SPS alignment, both on the island of Ireland, but also by implication that would have implications for the whole UK. So from the very beginning, it's been known that really the two broad areas, in very broad terms, that cause disruption in terms of moving goods are customs processes. Customs processes are in a sense the thing where you couldn't really have. It's thought it would be very difficult to have a genuine customs border on the island of Ireland without having some form of fairly significant infrastructure. But in terms of SPS, an SPS means sanitary and phytosanitary, i.e. Animal health, basically, but also plant products. That you couldn't really do that on land. Whether you thought it was, so some people think it would be achievable that you could have an electronic customs border on land, that you wouldn't need any physical infrastructure. The truth is, that argument's kind of been disproved. But even if you accepted the belief that you could do customs electronically on land, it would, even with a fair wind behind you, most of the Aidan will remember the detail more than me, but even some of the optimists accept that it would take several years. You couldn't have done it by January the 1st last year, or January the 1st of this year, I should say. It wouldn't have been possible. But SPS is an area where actually a lot of the checks could be eliminated via an agreement. We talk sometimes about a Swiss-style agreement. That's because that Swiss-style agreement is really quite close. Sometimes David Frost likes to say that, well, the Swiss wouldn't agree that now. I think the truth is that Switzerland's relationship with the EU is very complicated. And I see Adrian's mentioning that customs checks can occur away from the border. Well, I mean, not to get into a lay-by on that particular point, but the level of infrastructure that would be needed and the amount of what that would mean in terms of the amount of infrastructure and, frankly, bureaucracy that would impose on people moving across the island is a challenge too, I'm afraid, Adrian. But specifically on the SPS point, there are it would reduce basically the vast bulk of the checks. What Aidan talked about earlier on, things like the export health certificates, the various documentation that's going to be required from vets in order to move produce from the 1st of October in the absence of that agreement. That is, frankly, the biggest area of disruption. It's where the protocol does bite and create disruption in terms of moving goods from Britain to Northern Ireland. But the thing is, even even the truest Brexiteers don't think you could do an SPS border on land. It wouldn't be logistically feasible in the context of it wouldn't be logistically possible in the context of the fact that we have farms that we're in both Fermanagh and Monaghan. You need it's always been accepted that you would need to have that you would need to have a high degree of alignment on the island of Ireland. And of course, we have always had a single unit in terms of epidemiological for plant and animal health. The famous example is the foot and mouth crisis at the start of the century that was managed on an all-island basis. So the hard truth is, but it shouldn't be that hard a truth, is that 80% of the checks would be dealt with if you had an SPS agreement. As Aidan said earlier on, the UK would like to do it in a way which allows them the flexibility to diverge as maximally as possible, not just to sign trade agreements, but just to frankly have as much trade and regulatory autonomy as they would like. And in one sense, I get that. I obviously am not a Brexiteer. I dislike Brexit intensely, But if you're a Brexit purist, if you believe in leaving the European Union in order to exercise autonomy, then I understand that you want to exercise maximum autonomy. But the hard truth is, and this is where we all have to, and I should just say, I was so like delighted, not because I took pleasure in everything Brian said, his message at the end around the real feelings of uneasiness and instability in the Protestant Unionist community was tough to hear, but important that I heard it. But I was delighted that he was on and having given us those messages, but also that Brian is I think like us all, a realist about the situation we've been put in. And from my perspective, the truth is that we all have to acknowledge that there is a trade-off in this place. Whether you're an Irish nationalist in Northern Ireland or a unionist in Northern Ireland, you're never going to have the perfect. We should all have learned by now that you're not going to have your perfect constitutional settlement. Nationalists, unionists inside the United Kingdom will not be exactly the same as the rest of the UK. And in the event that there was United Ireland, it wouldn't be exactly the same as the rest of Ireland. Northern Ireland is both Irish and British, and it'll always be both Irish and British. So the point I'm coming to is that we've accepted a trade-off and complexity we certainly should have done in terms of how we operate this place. But unfortunately, the UK government hasn't yet decided or realised that if it's going for complete regulatory autonomy, that will come there will be a trade-off there, and that trade-off will be that Northern Ireland cannot quite enjoy that, can't be treated in exactly the same way. Certainly in terms of SPS, no one, even the hardest line Brexiteer, has ever said that you could treat Northern Ireland in the same way as GB when it comes to SPS if GB is deciding to diverge sharply. So there's a bit of a disingenuity at the heart of this that it's it's somehow the EU completely forcing this on Britain. I do think so. I think SPS is completely critical. Getting that right would deal with a huge amount of the practical challenges. I would hope that some of what Jeffrey Donaldson today was talking about removing or minimizing the Irish Sea border rather than removing the protocol. And if that's what he's talking about, and he's talking about an SPS deal, then he's right. I would agree with him, and because if you minimize the need to check products as they move from Britain to Northern Ireland, then you're removing a huge amount of the substantial burden and complexity that is created by the protocol in terms of SPS. So an SPS agreement is absolutely critical. It's unlikely that David Frost will want to negotiate a Swiss-style SPS deal, but there are other models. But the truth is that the more flexible and non-committal and temporary the UK government wants to make that SPS alignment, then the less disruption, then the more potential there is for disruption on the Irish Sea in terms of moving goods. But anything's better than nothing when it comes to the 1st of October, and when it comes to where we, in comparison to where we are now, we do need something. And ideally it's as deep and Swiss style as possible.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I think that answered that very well. And we have quite a few questions in tonight, actually, which is great to see. One of them is from Brendan Core, and I will just ask him to unmute now. Oh, disappeared. I could see him there. There we go.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for all your contributions. I thought they were excellent. One thing I want to ask about, I think, Aidan, you mentioned the peace dividend that many people felt they hadn't got. And I think that speaks to the heart of a lot of the problems we're seeing, where a lot of working class communities on both sides of the divide don't feel like they have seen the benefits of the peace process. And I've personally felt, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, Brian, but that's been at the heart of a lot of the tension we've seen where in some of these communities where they feel they haven't been listened to, they haven't seen the advantages that have developed. Those working class communities would be the hardest hit by any increase in prices that could result from said the protocol or any restrictions in trade. So I want to ask the panelists, what can we do to prevent the protocol having a negative impact on those communities? And what can we do more broadly, both within the terms of the protocol and outside it in terms of economic policy, to try to attract more investment and opportunities directly into those working class communities? And another side point, if I may, can that be done while paramilitaries continue to operate in those areas, or will they just continue to push away any opportunities for these areas?
I can comment, Ines. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Brendan. I mean, it's not rocket science. You know, economic prosperity will lead to a reduction in all levels of antisocial behaviour, crime, paramilitary activity, and you know, and I know Sinead touched on it as well. We haven't really promoted the potential economic benefits, and that's the first thing we got to do first and foremost. But I think you got to put it in context again. I mean, there's another dynamic happening within civic society across Northern Ireland that's been good, that has a real potential to have a real negative impact. I touched on it kind of briefly and what I was saying, and it's something that has really emerged in the last couple of years within unionism, and it's a process that has been replicated within nationalist Republican areas for maybe 10-15 years, and that's that kind of three-tiered kind of power leadership model that exists within unionism. In the past 4 or 5 years, you're seeing an increased influence of political unionism within grassroots communities. That may seem obvious, but it was never really the case until recently. I mean, whenever I started looking at the community sector, for example, in the mid-90s, you couldn't have got a unionist politician to be involved for love nor money. They saw us as being socialists and communists and a threat to their power base. Fast forward 20 years and political unionism start to recognise the benefit of getting involved in the mainstream community sector, to a point where they're starting to get involved as chairpersons or members of boards, or political nepotism has started to take over within mainstream community organisations. And that has created, again, a further disconnect to organisations who are starting to emerge. 20 years ago, there may have been paramilitary groups. Now they're forming in various other forms, peripheral organisations as bonfire and cultural organisations. I'm not sure, and I'm not saying for a second that they're aligned to paramilitary organisations, but they're organisations who fill that kind of paramilitary vacuum in terms of promoting a pro-union culture. But you also have sporting clubs and other organisations who don't feel part of the mainstream. As I say, that's happened within republicanism for a while, and if we're being honest here, particularly in Derry here, I mean, we've seen that political nepotism really infiltrate the community sector in parts of Gallia, Craig and Bogside and others. And if you were to, I mean, we've had focus groups in working class Republican areas in the Craig and stuff as part of our research, and we're hearing the same concerns there about that disconnect. So all this, it's very difficult to lift people out of that poverty whenever you have these malign forces kind of instigating other issues as well. I mean, economic prosperity in Northern Ireland and Derry has never been better in my lifetime. I mean, one of your great exponents, John Hume, really single-handedly almost turned around the economy here in the city with bringing investment to Seagate and others, which in itself has had a huge impact in terms of peace building and social inclusion and bringing people out of poverty, but also encouraging integration within a working environment. And until you do that on a large scale, then you're always going to have those social issues. But it's not unique either to Northern Ireland or Derry. I mean, if you go to London or Birmingham or any city in the world where there's poverty, you'll have levels of crime, you'll have levels of antisocial behaviour. It just so happens here in Northern Ireland, people sometimes use the constitutional issue or politics or paramilitarism to kind of use that as a vehicle. But I mean, it's about economics. That's a well-known fact. And I agree, young people, young Protestants, young Catholics haven't benefited from the the peace dividend the way they were promised, and that leaves opportunity for people with other motives to go in and manipulate those young people. And I mean, the young people who were riding in Tully Alley and Nelson Drive and other areas weren't, you know, they weren't doing it for, you know, they were being manipulated. People saw that vacuum and saw it as an opportunity to use it for their own means.
And as can I come in? Because I'm unfortunately I'm going to have to go. I'm about 40 minutes late for leaving. But I'm going to take my business hat off for a second, and I'm going to take my trade hat off for a second, and I'm going to talk to you for a second as me, because I'm not a politician, right? And there's one thing I want to get across to you today. You guys, yesterday was World Social Media Day, and it's 94% of all 16 to 24-year-olds are all on social media, and I'm sure you guys are as well. We need to learn from the rules of the mistakes of other people. So where a lot of loyalists are at the moment is at the same place as a lot of nationalists were in 2016, when the money was pulled from the LEAFA grants and when the thing about Irish speakers being crocodiles was said, right? £50,000 isn't going to change anything in the Irish language. Calling someone a crocodile isn't going to change anything for the Irish language. And I'm an Irish speaker. We brought up with it in the house. I'm more comfortable speaking Irish than I am speaking English. So those things weren't going to change my life. And neither were sausages going to change a loyalist life. But that's the way they're feeling, that it is their identity that has been hurt, right? So when you are on social media, right, remember the number one rule: use a bit of judgment and don't punch down. You know, if people are being nasty to you, you try and walk away for it or whatever. I give the worst I give on social media is saying "uck your owl hole" a few times if I think someone's talking the wrong way, and I would gladly say it. I've actually said it to Matthew a few times, but that's another thing. However, there's a serious message there that don't be punching down, right? People's feelings are valid. All you can do is try and explain the reality of it and try and explain the facts, especially when it comes to trade. And if there's, you know, I've talked tonight about the protocol, I've talked about the trade flows, I've talked about all that. If there's one thing that you take away from this, from me, is have a listen. Try and understand, but never punch down. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and that's completely right. We can't punch down, we have to be better, and we have to rise above that, especially when there is so much hate on social media. Thanks so much, Aidan, for coming. Aidan has to leave for babysitting. So I think we'll move on to our next question. So this is from Andrew Lorimer. Would the protocol on a simple level mean that we can sell Bushmills to the bars of Paris, but Loch Lomond would face barriers, i.e. an advantageous position? He didn't say exactly who this is for, but would anyone like to jump in on this? Just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Yeah, ask to unmute. There we go. Is that it there?
Obviously, I'm going to jump in on that really gratuitously. That's basically, yes, you've exactly described it correctly. I think Andrew asked that question. The advantageous position for, and we're already seeing this, by the way, Northern Ireland is already, the volume of trade, we haven't got trade data for how much we're selling to the rest of the EU, but the volume of trade we are selling, the volume of what we're selling into the south has gone up dramatically. Like it's doubled from the sort of historically high jumps in the last year. Meanwhile, we still have, we're still able to sell into Britain in exactly the same way as we were before. There are issues in terms of movement of some goods into here, as we talked about, because of checks, and we can streamline those. Although actually, it's worth saying, I was in a hearing the other day with the people who are involved, the consortium involved managing that border. They are, they think volumes of GBNI trade are actually, they're higher than they were. It's simply that, some of the processes are clunkier and we need to address those. But the simple point is correct. It's easier. It's not, we are now in an advantageous position, and in a sense, the bit that's already, the bit that we don't have to work to get FDI for for food. Bushmills has been there for hundreds of years. Cumber spuds have been produced for hundreds of years. We've been fishing Portavogie prawns off the Ards Peninsula for hundreds of years. Those products are easier to get to market on the continent than if you've got a Scottish langoustine, which is taking longer to get into French restaurants. You can replace it with the Portavogie prawn. If you've got a bottle of good Scotch, you can replace it with Bushmills, or for that matter, lots of the new craft distillers that we have, Dunvilles from the Ards Peninsula, the Quiet Man from Derry. All those can get to the European market quicker. We have obviously lamb from the Sperrins and the Mournes. We've got amazing beef from here too. And so we're in an advantageous position to sell that. And as I say, that's already happening. And the other thing that's happening is because we have an advantageous position relative to, for example, food producers in the south and in the rest of the EU, we still have unfettered access into the GB market. That's different. So, you know, I like in a strange way, I'm selling the benefits of the British market as some, you know, as a non-unionist. We're experiencing benefits of the European market, but also the British market, because if you know, the way theoretically and the way it's working in practice is that as of later this year, the UK GB is going to introduce the equivalent sausage ban, the chilled and prepared meat ban on stuff coming in from the EU that already the EU already has on British stuff. So at the minute you can British sausages or GB sausages they're not on shelves in Dublin or Dubrovnik or Copenhagen, but the UK is waiving those checks on stuff going into GB. They aren't going to do that forever. Later this year, they're going to start stopping those products coming into market. I think that means you probably won't be able to get Clonakilty black pudding, or if anyone's a fan of black pudding, I don't know if you are, but Clonakilty is the famous black pudding manufactured in Cork. But you won't be able to get Clonakilty black pudding in Cork in British supermarkets as straightforwardly as you were before. I'm not sure if they'll be able to sell it at all. But Doherty's black pudding from Derry and Hull's from Ballymena will be able to get into those British supermarkets. So the answer is yes, that is the protocol working, and it's already working in that way. We know, for example, flour mill, the Northern Ireland flour mills are operating above capacity because they're supplying because they are supplying the south and other parts of Europe. So that's not me making it up. That's not me being Panglossian. I'm not pretending there aren't significant challenges in terms of movement of goods, but there are already clear benefits, certainly in terms of farmers and food producers that we're already seeing, and we need to keep maximizing those opportunities. That, of course, doesn't mean there aren't challenges. It doesn't mean we don't need to overcome them. But it's also one final point. Just one more thing, as Colombo says, although everyone in this call is probably too young to know who Colombo is, but most economic opportunities do not simply come as straightforward economic opportunities. They have to be fought for. You have to get the door open. We've got the door open now. You know, it's not ideal the way it's happened. It's not ideal that there's instability. But if we can get to a place where people are reassured about their identity, they're people on both sides, or all sides, have reason to be offended by what's happened, to be honest. And if we can get to a place where we calm down some of our rhetoric, reassure people about their identity, and start to create jobs for people, because that's what fundamentally our party has always been about. And Brian mentioned John Hume earlier on. You know, yes, we have a constitutional view, but we're fundamentally also a social democratic party that believes in giving people the dignity of labour and the importance of giving people hope and economic opportunity and purpose. And actually, we have an opportunity to do that through the protocol, in the sense that it allows us to get our foot through the door. I'm not pretending there aren't challenges that we need to deal with. There are, but if we can apply our minds to dealing with them, then we can get to maximizing the opportunities. And a lot of those opportunities are already being exploited.
Can I just come in there to add one thing? Supply chains have certainly made adjustments in the past 6 months. And it's very, very obvious. Northern Ireland's export rates, or the value of the rates, is about 11.7 billion. back in 2019. Our rise in exports to the Republic of Ireland in the past 6 months has gone up by almost 10%. I mean, that's really, really significant for a small place like Northern Ireland. And we could be doing that again and again to other areas within the EU. It's as easy to sell into France and into the rest of Europe. And we need to make sure that we maximize that competitive edge that we currently have. And I think not to do it would be scoring an own goal on top of an own goal or the DUP had been pushing their hardest Brexit, because I believe that was, you know, an own goal there. But and maybe that's not really fair, because when you score an own goal, you know, from a political perspective, everybody here in Northern Ireland was punished as a result of that, a result of the actions of that hard Brexit. But now where we stand is where we have to start moving from, and that is with that you know, advantage. And I think all of us, I mean, I certainly am in politics for you know, one reason is, well, I want to see political, I suppose, social and economic justice for this place that I call home here, Derry. I mean, we've fought for years and years and years. And Brian, I think it's something that everyone in Derry feels, that they've all been left behind. It's and I suppose maybe the Protestant community feel that more acutely because of the minority role that they have. But it's certainly, you know, there is a differentiation between the west and the east of the province in terms of prosperity. And for me, there is now something that we can actually sell and sell to the rest of Europe, and that is this unique position that we have, unique trading position that we have, and we need to just get on and try to do it and do it together. And I think, you know, if you're talking about you know, how solid the union is from a Protestant perspective, there is nothing as weak as trying to sell you know, a broken place, you know, that nobody wants to buy that brokenness, or that you know, a political unstable place. Nobody wants to do that. So we've got to fix that first in order to secure all our futures and our kids' futures and the future generation, and for the young people that are on here today. This has to be a place that they're proud of, and we as politicians need to work to try and make that happen.
I find it hard even to unmute myself. Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you for Matthew as well for coming in on that one. And just on a personal note, it's absolutely true, because young people like me, we want to be proud of Northern Ireland. We're proud of where we're from. We're proud to be, you know, I'm Irish, but I'm also Northern Irish. I'm from Northern Ireland, and that's very important to me. And we want to be proud of Northern Ireland, but sometimes it's very, very tough when there's that strong rhetoric from both sides. It's just pulling us apart instead of pulling us forward. And we have quite a lot of questions here tonight, so hopefully we'll get through a good few before 9, but I don't want to keep everyone too late, because I understand it's the Thursday evening and everyone has other things to do, but we really appreciate you all staying on. So this one is from Brona Crabtree, and it's for Brian. Why do you think that the majority of unionist elected reps oppose the protocol, and does this represent the views of ordinary unionists? Oh, I'll just unmute you there.
As I indicated earlier on, there's a lot of nuances within unionism and many shades of unionism, and of course the DUP don't reflect. They reflect a very small minority of unionist thinking. But you've got to bear in mind that I think it's around 45% of unions don't even vote, because they can't find a pro-union party that meets their needs. Why the DUP are opposing it, it's quite simple. There's an election in 9 months, and they're on their knees. they're fractured. They've lost the grassroots community. So it's the whole kind of basic first rule of politics: create the fear factor and create us in them. And then that's the problem. I see an announcement, or just came across an article there where apparently Jeffrey Donaldson's first role as leader is going to be to continue to vociferously oppose the protocol, and that's, I mean, but to me, I think that they've miscalculated this time. I think there is a sea change, and I'm no great fan of Susan McKay, to be honest, but there's certainly a change within unionism there that I don't think the DUP have fully recognised yet. There is the disillusionment, the anger at grassroots, and there are people who are saying they're not going to vote at all. There are people who are saying they're going to switch their vote. There may be a growing need, I think, shift to Alliance Party, maybe even some to the SDLP. A minority, I suppose, to TUV, but I think the DUP are losing out. They're hemorrhaging votes, they're hemorrhaging support, and they've lost a lot of respect and credibility. So the simple answer to the question is it's because they always retreat back to the binary politics that they grew out of, and that's unfortunately why they'll continue to do that between now and next May, in the hope that the people will get to the polling station and say, well, if I don't vote for you, I get them, and that's unfortunately the narrow mind they have. But I think, as I say, as one kind of point of encouragement, I hope anyway, as a unionist, that people aren't prepared to do that anymore, and that they will hopefully see that in 9 months' time.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I think that's so true as well. It's not just us or them, because I think a lot of the time, just in my own experience, when you ask young people why they vote for certain parties, nationalists will tell you they vote for Sinn Féin because they don't want the DUP in power, and unionists will sometimes say to unionist friends, from what I've heard, that they vote for the DUP because they don't want Sinn Féin in power, when obviously there's far more options than that, and those parties aren't necessarily what suits people. But thank you very much for that response. And I think we just have a few more questions, but we're trying to keep it as short as possible so that everyone can get away, because we appreciate your time. So we have one here from Liam Macaulay, and he has asked from him to Matthew, but I'm sure all the other speakers are welcome to come in on this one. Given that, as Matthew pointed out, the protocol is quite complicated, how can we effectively inform the public of the facts surrounding the protocol as to counteract the quote-unquote sausage hysteria political rhetoric that Aidan pointed out?
I suppose the answer to that question, Liam, is when I find out, I'll let you know. I'm doing my best. Those of us who are doing our best. I mean, I think, right. I mean, I think we, in all political communications, you need to say things again and again, and you need to say them very clearly. I've been trying to say very, very clearly that we need to make the protocol work. We need to deal with the issues, but we also need to take advantage of the opportunities. One of the things I've learned since I became a politician is that sometimes, leaving aside the binary nature of politics here, as Brian was just eloquently talking about, leaving aside the kind of binary nature and the first, even people who have a constitutional view or a constitutional preference get unbelievably bored by constant focus on the Constitution and the binarization of identity and all of those things. You can have a view, you can have an aspiration, but I think certainly what our party should be doing is broadening our offer to people who are not decided nationalists, people who are not even necessarily nationalists, but people who want to hear from a centre-left party that have a view on the Constitution, but are not, but are also about improving the welfare of all the people we serve and creating economic opportunity and social justice. And that is how I think we start to convince people. I hope we have done some of it. Sinead and I have been doing a lot of this over the last few months, repeatedly talking about the opportunities, and we've been trying to ground it in the language of economic opportunity, not the language of identity. and where identity does come into it, as I said earlier on, it isn't about saying, well, this is something for that. One of the huge problems, I think, about the way the protocol's been seen is it's something for nationalists, and it's something unionists have to endure, and something nationalists should be shouting about as if it's a win. Nationalists have to deal with the disruptions as much as unionists, and unionists should be looking to benefit from the opportunities as much as anybody else. And the truth is that the protocol is as much a reflection of practical necessity, because, as I said, you couldn't logistically put an SPS board or a board in terms of animal health on the island of Ireland, even if it was politically possible. So I think the way to do it is to be diligent and to shout again and again about the potential for economic opportunity. That does at times create the risk. I think people, lots of people in this call are interested in politics, a lot of SDLP members in this call, SDLP youth members, and people who are interested in politics more generally. Sometimes when you communicate in political terms, by being clear and resolute, you end up sacrificing a degree of nuance. Before I did this, I spent a lot of time writing quite long articles about complexity and identity and politics in Northern Ireland and Irish history generally. And it's a lot easier when you don't have to get a simple message across. When you're writing, when you've got 1,000 words to write about complexity, you can capture this place pretty well. When you've got 30 seconds on the Nolan program to explain to people economic opportunity, you have to get your message across pretty simplistically. And unfortunately, that does sometimes make people feel that you're somehow deaf to concerns, or you're not interested in the nuance, which is in my case completely untrue. But I think how we do it is by grounding our arguments on the basis of economic opportunity, advantage and hope for people who don't have enough of it, including people in Nelson Drive and Tully Alley and Craigan, and indeed in my constituency in Sandy Row in the village, in the market, and talk about how this is actually about should be about giving them some of the economic opportunity that we have not delivered enough of in the last 23 years, or indeed for a lot longer.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was a great answer. And I think it's important that in all of the communication, it has to be reasonable, because we can't just get that hysteria from some politicians that just want to drum up hysteria, basically. But it's great to see, both sides, especially here tonight. This is the conversations that everyone should be having, not just people shouting at each other on certain radio shows. But we also have another question tonight, speaking of discussion. And this one is from Adrian Lonigan. He says that Lord Trimble says that the protocol will result in 60% of economic activity from Northern Ireland being governed by laws made in Brussels. As a party of Democrats, and I think he's aiming this to our SDLP MLAs, I think this is for you guys. As a party of Democrats, are we comfortable that the laws affecting our economic prosperity are being made in a foreign jurisdiction, and should we therefore vote down the protocol at the first opportunity? Yeah, I'll just unmute you.
I'm not meant to hug, but I'll come back in this, Adrian. Adrian might be disappointed if I didn't stand up, and I take it Adrian isn't a massive fan of the protocol. I mean, I would say, first of all, I have disputed before. Jim Allister has used the phrase 60% of economic activity. That to me cannot be right, because the protocol relates simply to goods, the movement of goods. 80% of our economy in Northern Ireland, indeed 80% of approximately the economy of Britain and the whole island of Ireland, is most developed economies now as services. So most economic activity does not relate to goods. Therefore, the protocol does not relate to most areas of economic activity. What we're doing tonight, none of us are trading goods. I would imagine a minority of people on this call are involved in the manufacturing or movement of goods for a living. So I'm afraid it's not true that 60% of economic activity is regulated by the protocol. A significant cohort of regulations, it's about 280 EU directives, will continue to apply to goods movements in Northern Ireland. That is significant, and I acknowledge we need to explain and understand how we can better influence those. What I would say is, I acknowledge this is something that we need to discuss more. We need to unpack and maximize what's in the protocol in terms of how we make representations to the European Union. around the formation of rules. I mean, I do think sometimes we can slightly overdo the idea of immense democratic deficit for two reasons. One, Northern Ireland is an extremely marginal part of the United Kingdom. Rules around economic activity, it has been fair to say, have never been made primarily with Northern Ireland in mind when they've been made in London. Secondly, there are a number of countries who have what Jim Allister might call a vassalage economic relationship with the European Union, notably Norway, notably Switzerland, both of which have significantly higher GVA and wealth per capita than Northern Ireland does. So while I accept that the protocol is not a perfect instrument, and I don't know very many people who would have designed it from scratch had they had their ideal world, I think it's wrong to say either that it regulates most economic activity in Northern Ireland. It simply doesn't, because most economic activity does not involve trade in goods. And secondly, we do need to understand how we can influence, shape if rules that affect us in Brussels. And we can do that. The protocol provides for the North-South Ministerial Council. Article 14 of the protocol provides the North-South Ministerial Council can make representations to the Joint Committee and the Specialised Committee. The UK government continues to have representation in Brussels, in which the Northern Ireland Executive has representation. In a sense, we could have a completely outsized amount of influence in Brussels, given our size and given our position, if we play our cards right, if we maximise the interpretation of the protocol. But lastly, there are several countries who don't have full EU membership and therefore don't have full voting rights when it comes to all directives, but they managed to get by and they managed to create a hell of a lot more economic opportunity for their citizens than we've done in this place.
Can I just come in there as well, and just following up from what Matthew has said? I mean, this is a place that has got great experience with political deficits, but the protocol does particularly allow for our voice to be heard within the platforms, as Matthew said, the North-South Ministerial Council and all of that, and the joint committees. And I think one of the things that we really, really need to make sure that it does happen, that our executive works effectively and has one voice and uses the various platforms that are available for our voice to be heard, and for that political might that we could have. That other countries don't have within the, like Switzerland and others that don't have it. We could have influence if we use those platforms properly, and we need to actually do that and do it effectively. And one of the things that would be just criminal to do is to keep shutting down, to say that the other areas of our political institutions that the unionist community would, for example, disengage with them or pull them down or not attend, or that. I mean, that's where real political deficit would actually happen, where we don't work within the context of the existing platforms that we have, because they're very, very important, and they're very important to all the citizens in Northern Ireland, particularly in the areas in which they work, when not just in trade, but in health and energy and infrastructure and other areas which really help citizens. So that would be a greater hit to our political deficits if we didn't work with them. So it's important going forward that we do so.
Thank you very much for that, both of you. And we just have one last question. Sorry to keep everyone. I know this is running over, and then we'll go into final remarks. And this one is from Rory, so I'll unmute him to ask it himself.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Now, this is of particular importance to me as somebody who works in the care sector. There seems to be nothing mentioned of our health service long term since what was plastered inside of a bus a couple of years ago. What impact long term is the protocol potentially going to have on our already struggling health service, especially if COVID goes on for another year or more?
Thank you, Rory. And I think that's pretty much open to everyone. So feel free to come in. If you're muted at the minute, raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
I'll take that then. The impact on our healthcare or health service. Well, To be honest with you, Rory, I think that we have a particular crisis in our health centre or health service here in Northern Ireland. Our waiting lists are longer here in this region than they are in the other regions of the UK. I don't think it's down to the protocol. I think it's down to the dysfunctionality of our political institutions. And it hasn't happened overnight either. It hasn't happened in the last 12 months. It has happened over many, many years where political parties are refusing to actually make hard decisions and make uncomfortable decisions and probably unpopular decisions. And it's just the actual way that we are devolved institutions are the way they work and the fact, and I mean, I'm making a political statement here from my own political perspective. You know, it's the dysfunctionality of the big two, where everything becomes a bargaining chip, and we really don't deal with the underbelly issues that are affecting our citizens, and that is health and education, and we need to make big moves on that. Unfortunately, this mandate is a very short mandate. And it has been largely dominated by COVID and the pandemic, and in many ways all resources and all monies and all investment within the context of government department has been in addressing the outworkings of the pandemic, and so the furlough and business rates, etc., etc. But there is a massive piece of work to be done in relation to improving our health service and our health outcomes. It's okay having a national health service, but if people don't actually have physical access to it, then it's not helpful to anyone. And I think that we will, in the next mandate, have to make really, really difficult choices in relation to our health service, but also our education, and make those. And those are they're not broken because of the protocol. Let's face it. We can blame the protocol for lots and lots and lots of things, and people do on a regular basis, even things that it's not responsible for. But our poor outcomes in our health service is down to us as politicians here in Northern Ireland. We've made bad choices. We have not made decisions, and we need to move into transforming our care, and we need to do it very, very, very quickly.
I just say really quickly after that, just on the agree with everything Sinead said about waiting lists. I think specifically on the protocol, the protocol doesn't really directly touch on the management of the NHS other than two areas, and they're kind of one that isn't in the protocol, which is north-south, and then the other, which is something that we do need to resolve. I'm sometimes accused of not caring about the challenges of the protocol. I certainly do. One of the things that needs to be resolved is moving of medicines into Northern Ireland. That is a particular challenge, and a large part of that challenge came because the protocol was, as Aidan said earlier on, huge cliff edge, and it became live very quickly. We basically need to have a long-term solution around moving medicines into Northern Ireland that is not completely as written in the protocol, and I think the EU, to be fair to them, are basically there in terms of changing their own legislation and changing their own rules. That would involve things like having the NHS in Northern Ireland is clearly is not going to be smuggling counterfeit drugs into the EU single market. So we need to get, the EU I think realizes that there needs to be worked as pragmatically as possible, and I think it will be, and I don't think there are going to be any issues there, but it's a question of it has to be dealt with. So that's probably not exactly what you're asking about. The other issue is on north-south and around what was the cross-border healthcare directive, which still exists, but Northern Ireland is not part of it anymore. And that's in the broad sweep of areas that is not covered by the protocol. As I say all the time, and I've said on this call, the protocol only relates to a very narrow sliver, or a relatively narrow sliver of areas that would otherwise, if they didn't exist, you might have to have a significant land border, basically, in terms of goods checking. The cross-border healthcare directive is the directive that allows effectively reciprocal healthcare arrangements and state citizens in one member state to get healthcare in one jurisdiction and for it to be paid for by the state in the other jurisdiction, and for that to happen seamlessly. That no longer applies to Northern Ireland. It's not part of the protocol. It has made it more complicated for the HSC in Northern Ireland and the HSE in the Republic to interact. And frankly, that is an area where the protocol, in a sense, the protocol is a challenge for healthcare because it doesn't cover healthcare really. And in the Northwest, where Sinead and Brian are, actually, and where you are, Carl, that's a particular challenge because, as you know, healthcare is particularly if you're in Donegal and you're getting cancer care out in the Galvin. And it's one of the areas where, in order to deal with our waiting list crisis and in order to provide better care for people all over the island, one of the clear solutions is just greater integration on an all-island basis. It's not a nationalist agenda. That's simply about delivering healthcare better, and Brexit makes it a bit harder because like, for example, now health professionals who work on both sides of the border now need to be dual registered, and they're trying to get a bureaucratic fix for it, but it's just an extra encumbrance. So it's one area where it just, Brexit's just creating more bureaucracy and more difficulty in everyday life. And because healthcare basically isn't covered by the protocol, there are no quick answers. So the protocol doesn't create problems for healthcare once we get the movement of medicines into Northern Ireland sorted. The protocol doesn't really cover healthcare, and so it's Brexit that's creating some challenges that we'll need to resolve.
Thank you very
We
much.
have massive problems here in relation to orthopedics, with very long waiting lists in relation to orthopedics. Quite a number of operations for hip replacements, knee replacements, etc., took place within the European Union. That's now lost to us. So, as I say, our waiting lists are growing, and we have less availability to get these operations done in other EU countries. So that is a problem as well. Although, however, there has been a re-establishment of arrangements between North-South in relation to reciprocal care made there last week. But again, we're still limited. We don't have the choices that we had last year before we went into the moving away in January. So
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you both for coming in on that, because I think healthcare is something, again, that nationalist or unionist, we need to get these waiting lists down. And there's so much that is affecting that. COVID, Brexit, everything. It really just is a perfect storm at the minute. But that was our final question, and thank you so much to everyone who did ask the questions. We really appreciate it, and we loved hearing your thoughts, because that's what these are about. Giving a voice to people who have the questions and giving the opportunity to ask them to the people who can give you answers. And I think we've got some really brilliant answers here tonight. So sorry to keep everyone on, but we are just going to finish up now. So if I could ask each of the speakers just very quickly, this event is mainly for young people, because this is SDLP Youth and everyone is welcome, of course, but it's mainly about giving the mic back to young people. So if you were speaking to a young person who didn't really know what the Northern Ireland Protocol was and was concerned about what it would do to affect their future and how Brexit is affecting their future, what would you say to them? Just quickly, and I'll just go with the order I can see on my screen. So Sinead, what would you say to them?
Well, I think young people should become active in politics. I think their voice is needed now more than ever. They have a contribution to make, and they have a future that they need to shape. And I would ask them to get involved in politics, and that's not just a call out for to get involved in SDLP. Well, that's very nice if they do so, but to get involved in politics and don't hide their self underneath, or don't be the quiet people that say it's not for me and walk away. We need you to change Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Sinead. Great words. Brian?
Yeah, I would echo what Sinead says. I would encourage every young person to be progressive and pragmatic and honest, and I think you'll get it here with what I've seen from the young people here in the SDLP. It's good to see that at least there's one party in Northern Ireland where its future seems pretty secure, but also to remember that there's other forms of leadership. I think managed to make a difference in my community without going down the political route. So I would encourage those who don't want to like me, put their head, are brave enough to put their head above the parapet to, you know, to get into the communities, volunteer to work, because you can make a difference, and you can get, you know, Derry's quite a small place. Northern Ireland's a small place, and you can make a difference and get access to the policymakers and decision makers by various means. So keep doing it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Absolutely, get involved any way you can. Will, what would you say to them?
I'd have to agree completely with what Sinead and Brian are saying. As a young person myself, I think it's massively important that young people get involved with politics, and particularly around the issue of the protocol. I think what's decided today about the protocol, as far as we know, is going to be our future. And I feel like if our voice isn't included in what's going to be our future, there's really no point. So I think when young people have a lot of rhetoric about not wanting to get involved in politics and being a bit boring, it does have some dry times. I think it's massively important, particularly around the issue of the protocol, that you get involved in whatever way you can, whatever party, it doesn't matter what, just get your voice heard, because it is your future. That's what I would say.
Thanks very much, Will. And Matthew, finally.
Well, certainly get involved. I agree with everything that's been said. I would say two specific things. Like, I don't mean this to sound like a grouchy. I was nearly 40, and so I am officially, but middle-aged, I think, which is like shocking. But anyway, I think to echo something Brian said about seeing people face to face, getting into, like, if you're doing politics or community work, like the difference of seeing people face to face is so important. And I do mean face to face, not just engaging with people. I mean, this is great. This kind of setting is great, but even more now that we're able to do that, like seeing people face, looking people in the eye, people who not just have a different constitutional perspective than you, but have a different life experience than you, a different educational background than you, a different geographic background than you. Seeing people and experiencing people, and of course we know young people have been, for very unavoidable reasons, have been denied, more than a year now of a precious time. And then the other point, which is related, is getting information from sources other than social media, taking time to read, whether that's reading about Irish history or reading about the detail of trade arrangements. If you're interested in politics, I think the best thing to do, those of us who are interested in politics and debate, can be drawn to social media, particularly Twitter, and the constant jousting and the constant looking for ways to defeat the argument the other person's made, looking for ways to show that the other person's wrong or the other person's position's daft. And I know that because I'm guilty of it myself. I've literally been doing it today, and it's part of my job, so it's not completely wrong to do it. But if everything that you do about politics is about a screen, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be on social media or that this call is wrong, but there are two things which are like huge assets to doing politics properly, are seeing people in the flesh and reading actual paper books with so that I don't mean that to sound in any way patronizing. I'm as much saying that to myself as to any young person. The joy of going away, reading and thinking about something in detail and complexity, and the joy of seeing human beings face to face where you engage and talk about complex stuff, is a complete antidote to the false world of complete binary argument and constantly trying to humiliate and prove people wrong on social media.
Absolutely, thank you very much, and wise words from all of you. I'm seeing your bookshelves. Wise words from all of you, and thank you so much to all of our speakers for coming this evening. We really appreciate your time, and to Ian as well. I know we had to nip on, but it's great. It really was great to hear all your perspectives. Not just as someone who's hosting this call, but as a young person myself, it gives me a lot of hope in our politicians and in our community leaders and in our fellow young people, that there is solutions to this Northern Ireland Protocol, because do you know what? It's causing issues, if only contentious. I know we see pros, we see cons, but if it's causing contention within the community, it is causing an issue, and we need to kind of evaluate why that is. But Sinead, Brian and Will and Matthew as well talked about getting involved in politics. And of course, I think that's important as well. Where your political opinion lies, get involved, speak out about it, let people hear your perspective and understand where you're coming from, because it's only understanding that we will ever progress forward. Like, we can have these talks all day, but if we don't listen to other people, we will never move forward. But if your political persuasion is of the social democratic and Labour taste, you're welcome to join the SDLP or indeed SDLP Youth. And I think our SDLP Youth Carl is just going to talk a wee bit about it now.
Thanks very much for that good introduction, Inez. I'm very thankful to all of our speakers who have come tonight and to everybody who's sitting in the crowd as well and has managed to listen in for so long. We're finishing up just sort of right on time. But I've really enjoyed the conversation tonight, and it's actually given me a lot of hope. And I think Inez kind of briefly referenced hope and stuff there now. But I think that's kind of the theme at the moment. Sometimes I think it can be so easy to, and I found it especially during when there was disorder and stuff, public disorder over the protocol a couple of months ago. I found it quite hard, especially as somebody who had just been elected to be chair of SDLP Youth, and who was seeing people my age and younger than me out in the streets throwing petrol bombs and burning their own community and things like that. I found it quite hard to have hope at times. But I do think, and this is something I was speaking to a French journalist the other day over the phone for a documentary, and said that essentially the protocol and the economic arrangement behind Brexit isn't something that is inherently owned by one side of the community or the other, and it's not something that should really be in the actual thing itself. Shouldn't be, sort of divided in that way. But unfortunately it is, and that's a product of the place that we live in. But I think that the only way that that's solved is through having actual political engagement and dialogue. The SDLP is, as I always see it, as a big Malinite, is the party of dialogue and reaching across the divide and that sort of thing. And I think it's only with actual political representation and dialogue that we can solve these problems. That's why I don't subscribe at all to this notion that we should pull down the assembly at every chance we get if we disagree with the other parties. I think that our representation isn't something that we should be using as a bargaining chip, and I think that it's vital and it's the only solution to resolving the problems that we see right now with the NI protocol. And again, the part where hope comes into this is the hope that at the next elections and the elections after that and the next 10 years and the next 20 years we see solid change. And I'm going to quote here, but it's a quote that I used recently, but I think it's very pertinent at the moment, and it's a Seamus Heaney quote, and it says, "History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme." And I can be honest, and it might be a wee bit foolish, but I do have a lot of hope these days, because I have hope that in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, in the next year, we'll actually see the change that we want to. And we can actually build this new shared home place that we always chat about, and actually change the face of the country for the better of the people. So again, thank you to everybody who's come tonight. And I do honestly think it's been very thought-provoking is the only way I can describe it. But thanks again to all of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who came tonight. It was great to get such a great turnout. And like Carl said, there is hope. And there will be change, but only if you get involved, because you have to make the change if you want to see it. So thank you all for coming, and keep in the loop with our social medias as we announce our other policy and progress events, because unfortunately this is not the only issue facing Northern Ireland, and it is certainly not the only issue facing young people. And I said at the start, we're not going to sort out the Northern Ireland protocol in this talk, but I think we have made a lot of progress anyway. It was so great to hear from everyone, and it was great to get those questions as well. So hopefully we'll see you all at the next event, and we really appreciate the turnout. So thank you all so much. It was great, and I think I'll end the meeting now and let you all get on with your evening. Have a lovely rest of your evening. Bye.
Bye.